Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great and enjoyed these stories. I put together some of my favourite park ranger and deep woods middle of nowhere camping stories into this video, so I really hope you all enjoy it. Let me know too how you're getting ready for Halloween in the comments below too. Take care and I'll speak to you all soon. I worked as a fire ranger for a couple of years and it was one of my favourite jobs that I've ever had. It's something that I'm almost envious I couldn't do for longer. I did enjoy being outside, but to be honest, I'd kind of struggle with the loneliness really. Every so often you'd have somebody pop up or you might change over shift and have a brief interaction, but there wasn't really much time that you could spend with people, and that's something I didn't enjoy about the job. And I don't know, I just don't think it's good for you in the long run. I've recently changed jobs and I'm around people a lot more, and sometimes I do reminisce and think back, and I kind of trick myself into thinking it would be the right path for me now. But realistically, I know it wasn't, and I did have a story that happened to me that I'd like to share where I think this would be a good place for it. Now, where I was stationed was absolutely beautiful. We had these huge trees everywhere which I absolutely loved, and you could do these beautiful nature walks through it, and that's something that I did quite frequently. I actually opted to walk for about an extra 2 miles just so I could go through more of it when I'd arrive for work. It was really gorgeous, honestly. And yeah, sometimes when I parked my car, it was easy for me to get lost and forget what I was truly there for. I kind of understand how places like this could inspire different stories. You know, like you get Lord of the Rings and things like that. Well, I just kind of get it. And if you're someone that lives in a city, then I'd strongly recommend that you spend some time out in the forest. And I mean real forest, not just the parks. Like the national parks, you know, the big ones. Yeah, sorry if I'm going off topic at all now. So I'd like to share what happened on a Pacific night while I was on my duty. Now, before I get to that, I'll have to explain some of my day. Now, my day was pretty good. I spent most of my time just doing my watch and just listening to songs on the radio. I had a really strong radio up there and it really got good signal. I mean, how could it not being that high up? I tried my best not to go down too often, but I'd have to do it for the toilet every so often. I think from coming up the kind of spirally stairs, I ended up twisting my knee awkwardly and it was kind of playing me up. It was something I could hope I could just sleep off, but I wasn't too sure as I had a few other injuries on the same side of my body. For some reason, all of them happened to be in roughly the same place, but my other side was completely fine. Now, I did have to make this trip down a few times, and while doing so, something felt different. It was almost like the atmosphere was different when I got further down. Not in the sense of atmospheric, but I don't know, I just kind of felt tense and uneasy. Almost like something terrible had happened, but I didn't know what. I don't know if you've ever got bad news, but one that makes you panic. It was kind of similar to that, so for me this was a really bizarre thing. I did wander around a few times and try and take my mind off things, and that's when something else weird happened. While walking, my vision suddenly goes very blurry, and it's almost like I'm seeing double. Now during this time, for just a second, I can see some kind of figure further up. It almost looks like somebody dressed in medieval type robes, but the religious people. Now I only see it for a second, so I don't know whether this was in my head or not, but they suddenly just go with a big flash, and things are immediately back to normal. I think this is odd and think that I've gotten too hot, so I actually go back to the station. There's a thermometer there, and I quickly give myself a check over, but everything's normal. I decide I need to chug some more water. In places like this, it's pretty easy to not stay on top of how much you're eating or drinking. Also, some people in my family are diabetic, which is definitely not me because of the way I eat, but I don't know. You can never be too careful, I guess. So I decide that I should eat some food too. Now, once again, after eating, I get the weird feeling and the sense of dread comes over me that something's just off. I then realise I can see the same figure again that I saw before, though only this time I can see them much clearer than before, and I'm convinced it's actually a person. I then go to speak to them and say, hey, how are you doing? And they seemingly just ignore me and walk off. Another weird thing I noticed is that they don't have any hair whatsoever, almost like them Tibet monks, but different. But what on earth would one be doing here? And they aren't really dressed appropriately. I don't know, their clothes just look too dated, and almost even if you're a religious person out here, it seems like you would actually dress more appropriately. You can get foot injuries really easily here, and yes, I was suffering from one of those too, and it was on the same side. I don't know whether it's plantar fasciitis, but the bottom of my foot was killing. I mean, that mixed with my knee being bad was really a big problem for me. But anyway, I tried to put that aside, and I just think it's a normal hiker. I get back up to the top of my station, and night's starting to fall. Now that's good for a couple of reasons, but one is it actually makes my job a lot easier. Because obviously you can spot fires quite easily in the darkness, but that's not always the only thing that you see. I had a report of one of my other friends who worked here, saying that he was staring up at the stars. He saw one move, then another, and assumed that it was a satellite, until suddenly they shoot off in different directions. I kind of joked about it and said, oh, it's just the old man going off on one again, but I don't know really. Especially when you're out here on your own, it's almost like if there are visitors come in, then they're going to choose this time to come and pounce on you. But hey, that was just my wider thinking. Me, I did like to stargaze every so often, and obviously being far away from light pollution you could see the stars really well, and it's something that I really enjoyed doing. Now as I'm stargazing, I'm pretty certain I can see something off. It looks like a star, then another one moving parallel to each other, and I say, God, I'm pretty sure I'm seeing what my friend saw to myself. I won't say his name here, but I say, he wasn't crazy after all, and kind of laugh. These stars didn't shoot off, but there was definitely something weird about them. I actually worry that maybe the tower was starting to crumble or lean and that this is about to be it, but I stay still for a second and realise it isn't. This is actually one of my biggest fears that I have, the station going down with me on it and me just holding onto the sides trying to make it. I've had nightmares about this and generally wake up really scared inside the station, and when I've done that I've actually been really fearful that it's happening because obviously I'm up there and your body doesn't always get used to it, especially not for short spells, but this isn't the case. The stars are just weird. I tell myself that I'm just imagining things and I go to sit down. Now this is the first really strange thing that happened. I go to write in my diary that not much is happening today, and I wake up again. Now, I went into a very deep sleep and I must have dreamt for probably 12 hours. I had a very long dream that I was actually transported to medieval times, which is really bizarre. But this wasn't the case. Of course it wasn't. I looked at the alarm clock. It's only been 10 minutes. How could it have only been 10 minutes if I'd been dreaming for 12 hours? This is really bizarre. I then quickly scan around and grab my binoculars, worried that I've eclipsed time that is potentially dangerous, and this is one of our biggest issues on our job. If you fall asleep, you're not only putting your own life at risk, but also others who you're there to protect, and that's something that I don't want to jeopardize. So I quickly slam a coffee and try and normalize myself a bit. As I'm slowly waking up, I grab the binoculars and peer around, and that's when I see it. It almost looks like a glowing ember of a fire, and with some excitement, I quickly focus in the lenses. That's when I see another one, and another one. I then put the binoculars down trying to see it, but they're just too far away for me. Thinking that maybe this is some kind of encounter with the third kind, I start to panic a bit now. I then pan around the binoculars, and it seems like it's a big row that continues and continues. I can't believe what I'm seeing. All of the lights form a big circle around my tower, and they're getting closer and closer. They're all kind of like a red-yellow glow, but it's really weird. I look up quickly expecting there to be a big mothership about to take me away, but strangely I don't see anything. I look down and around and that's my best explanation. I then quickly go over to the radio and radio in that something's definitely off and there might be fire very close to me. They say that they're going to send a team out to investigate and to make sure that I stay in radio contact and obviously evacuate if necessary. I say no worries and I quickly jump down to look outside again. While looking around with my binoculars, I can suddenly see that they're very close and almost at the base of my tower, which is impossibly quick. Now, after letting my eyes adjust for a few seconds, I suddenly realise that these are people holding these torches. These seem to be people, but very small, all wearing the same kind of dark robes that I've seen earlier. I now scream and run back into the tower and report that there's no fire, there's people coming to burn this thing down. They then say not to worry and that they're sending some other people there, and they ask me to see what else is happening. I'm almost froze to the spot, but I force myself to go and look outside, and when I do, there's nothing. Literally, nobody there below the tower, nobody around at all, for miles. I search desperately. I frantically try and explain what's happening, and I ask them desperately to send some people out, and they say not to worry, there are. They then start questioning, am I fully awake yet? And am I sure it's not just my eyes playing tricks on me, but I'm absolutely certain of what I've seen. I ended up staying up there and refusing to come down until another 20 minutes until some other workers arrived. They question me, and they say they can't see evidence of anyone. Now, this is where it gets a bit crazy for me. One of them does find something odd. They can see some strange markings on the ground. It's almost like hieroglyphs, but not quite. It's like strange symbols that have been burned into the ground, obviously with something, but there's no people whatsoever. We do quite a big look around and we literally can't find anything to explain what this is. I'm completely freaked out now, and luckily one of the other workers takes over from me. A few days go by and nothing else really happens, and eventually I return to another station and the rest of my job goes completely normal for those couple of years. Now, none of the other workers experienced anything even remotely similar to what I did that day, and that kind of messes with me in more ways than one. I know for a fact that I wasn't seeing things, but I still don't know what I saw that day. This experience put me off being a fire ranger, and I'm kind of glad that I did, because I'd hate to be out there alone and have something similar happen again. Since this, I've also never been able to camp alone. While working as a ranger, I stumbled upon something that will never be removed from my memory. Now, I was doing my regular patrols when I noticed something odd. I can see what appears to be two white sticks holding up something. I get closer and investigate what it is, and it becomes apparent that these are some kind of animal bones holding up something. Extremely curious about what this is, I go around to the other side, and to my horror, I can see my name on a wooden sign in what appears to be blood. Now by this point, I wasn't sure if what I was actually looking at was human remains or something, so of course, I radio this in, and the law enforcement are also involved. Turned out upon lab testing, it was all belonging to animals, the blood and the bones, but that leaves a question that still haunts me. Who knew my full name, and why did they place it there for me to find? I remembered one thing I saw while working on the trails. It kind of haunted me a lot, especially because people were so casual about it. I remembered somebody said, hey, are you a ranger? And I said, yeah, what's wrong? And they said, well, my dog keeps looking at this tree weird, I think you should investigate it. So I go over and make my way to this tree that they keep on going on about, until I see it. Probably about 50 or 60 feet up into the air is a carcass of an animal. It's pretty much bone dry, almost like it had been fleshed out, and only the bones were left. How it got up there, I never knew or was able to ever find out, and it's still the weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life. I work as a park ranger, and I had something that I experienced today which I don't quite understand. One of my other worker colleagues had told me that he'd seen something weird that he couldn't explain and wanted me to investigate too. He'd given me the exact location and said that he wasn't going to preface it, he just wanted me to go there and let him know what my experience was, and I said okay. I was actually a little bit cautious, but I'd known this colleague for a while, so I make my way over to that location and I find a door, literally in the middle of the woods, for no reason at all. It looks like quite an old door, but kind of like a grand one that you might see on an old house, and weirdly, it had one of those old door knockers. I look around and don't see anything and decide to get closer and make it up to the door. Now when I get to the door, I can hear a weird sound around it, almost like lots and lots of people whispering, but there's no one around. It's very faint but very distinct. I decide that I should maybe try and open it, but before I do, I'm kind of caught making eye contact with the knocker. It's so creepy looking. It's like an almost demon face one, but I decide to tap on it a few times to knock on the door. And as I do so, for a moment, everything changes to red and black in colour, almost like I'm looking at something through a filter. I look around and I can only describe this as being in hell. I'm in what appears to be a weird cave system or something. I can hear screams all around me, some weird dark figures moving in the distance, and there seems to be blood dripping off everything, and within a second I go back to normal, and the whispering stopped. So I very bravely sprint back and get all the way back to the station and report to my buddy what had happened. He said he didn't know what to make of it too. Now this is the weirdest part. When we went back to investigate with a group of others and were actually recording it this time, it's nowhere to be found. We gone to the exact spot that we had both seen it and it was literally completely gone, like it never existed in the first place. Now, today I'd like to share my story that happened quite a number of years ago, though the feelings have never really left me. I'm somebody who spent a lot of time working out in nature. I was a park ranger, so I'd always done things outside. I mean, not just while I was at work, but for other reasons too. I remembered I had some friends that were really begging me to go out to the desert with them. I had this best friend called John, and he was the one who was the most up for it. He kept on telling me about all of these crazy experiences that he had out in this particular area of the desert. He said that he would see these people, well, he kind of describes them as some kind of beings or something, and I don't know, it was linked to UFOs and things, and I'm actually sure that I saw a UFO once. I was on top of one of our towers that you use for lookouts, and I saw a light in the sky that almost appeared red then purple, then suddenly split off in 4 different directions with different sections of it going the different ways. So yeah, I was kind of up for this. I was a little skeptical. I mean, even though I'd seen a UFO, I didn't really trust my eyes, and being out there and being so bored at times, I guess your mind plays tricks on you. But this friend John kept on and on going on about it, and eventually I decided to agree. He said it was kind of like a spiritual place that you could go to, and pretty much you'd be able to talk through all of your problems with these beings and that everything would be okay. Now don't ask me why I actually agreed to do this, I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking at the time. I'm not someone who really gives into peer pressure too. He'd actually been going on about this for ages, and I don't know, I felt bad for always saying no, so we set out on one particular day. We parked up and made sure that we have all of our water with us, and we set off. Now we had some camping gear with us, so we're going to be okay as long as the water didn't run too low. We decided that we'd never go far from where we parked, so that way we can always go back and get more supplies if we really need them. So with that, off we went. Now the first area that we're going in, you can see lots of different tyre tracks, and apparently according to John this wasn't good because it meant other people would be around, but he told me not to worry too much about this. The area that we're in is actually pretty nice. We're kind of flanked by hills and there's kind of like a mountainy part up ahead of us. It looks really cool though, to be honest. And we continue on our hike. Now John's actually a really good friend, and he's genuinely one of the only people that actually understands me and is very similar with me in life. We have had a few arguments, but just over silly things, and I guess this guy was more of a brother than my actual brother to me at times. Now that meant we would talk about everything. Often it was about relationships and other things that had went wrong in our lives before, and the more we spoke, I guess the more that we realised we're similar. And again, I didn't actually know just how similar we were. I mean, heck, it was pretty unbelievable, but I won't share too many details here about that, just because it kind of goes into some of the darkness that we both seem to experience somehow at the same time, almost living opposite lives, but parallel emotionally. So we talk through everything, and he says that we're not too far from where we need to get to, and that's when we encounter the first group of people. Now, they do seem a little bit weird at first. John also seems a little bit hesitant, but he ends up going up to them and starts talking. It turns out that they're here for the same reason, and although they seem a little bit weird, we decide to try and talk to them. I wasn't sure if one of them was on something, but he just seemed too talkative. They tell us that they've got something they want us to drink, and apparently they made some nice bush tea for us. Who was I to say no, and I end up drinking it. We exchange a couple of snacks, and it was actually a really good time. Now we'd been with these guys for quite a while and eventually decide that it's time to leave them and go on. Now we continue on our way, and you can actually see that the path is marked by different rocks that people have put there, so we know that we're not going anywhere too dangerous or anything. My friend John constantly reminds me to drink lots of water, and I keep doing so. I seem to get a headache now, which I really can't fend off for some reason. I have pretty sensitive eyes though. I can't even look at the ground when it's bright without sunglasses, without my eyes being strained. I also get this weird thing where I kind of see like flashy lights or something, but I know what it is. It's not a migraine, but I guess it's just my eyes going weird. Sometimes I'll see a strange bright colour too, but I guess that doesn't matter too much. We come up to one part of the hike where there's quite a big drop on the left hand side of us. If we're going to fall now, we're going to be in trouble, so we really try our best to avoid this. My friend then says that we haven't got too much further to go before we get to the people, and that's when we encounter some rangers. That's really odd, I think. There shouldn't be any rangers up here whatsoever. I don't know what they're doing, and we just say hi and don't really think much of it and just keep going. They seem a little odd, but I wasn't paying too much attention. That's when my buddy John says, "Did you notice something?" I say, "No, what's that?" He says, "Well, those guys looked almost exactly the same as each other, and I don't know, something just felt really off about them." I didn't really notice it, but trying to think of it, it almost felt like they didn't have much of a facial expression, almost like they were wearing a rubber mask, but I can't really tell. They eventually go off a little bit further, and we don't think too much of it as they slowly go out of sight. I then explained that I've heard about some twins who become park rangers in an area not far from where I was working at the time, and that, yeah, it's just basically a normal thing that you will get stuff like this. You know, you get families who are raised in the outdoors like me, and that's what the families want to do, jobs like ours. And my buddy John tells me not to worry too much and makes a joke out of it. And I tell him, hey, I'm not the one worried here. And we press on. Now my friend keeps on talking to me about this thing and how great it's going to be. And eventually we set up the tents. we do this, and I keep on slamming my water. One thing that's weird is that I haven't really had the urge to urinate too much yet. Usually I'll be going like every 10 seconds almost, but I don't really feel the urge to. I guess it was hot, but the weird thing is it's not really too hot now. There's kind of an overcast in the clouds, and it means that it's not really warm, it's actually a little bit cold. But John says, hey, come on man, we've got to go up to this before sundown, because this hill is where you're going to see it. Now, I was either convinced that he was just off his head, or there were actually aliens here. We're nowhere near Roswell, so it wasn't anything like that. But I don't know, I've given him the benefit of the doubt. Talking to this friend though was honestly like a therapy in itself. It was almost like the ideas that I had, my friend could give me, and the ideas that he had, he could give me, and it would kind of complete each other. Not in a weird way, but just kind of like a nice bond and friendship. So yeah, it's getting a little bit dark, and I keep telling my buddy that we have to remember where the tent is because we're not going to see it. My friend doesn't take much notice of me and keeps on going. Now, he says that he's going to continue on, but I say that I feel like I need to stop for a bit. I don't know why, but suddenly the headache becomes absolutely overwhelming. Now, my friend continues on and I just let him go. Now, I feel extremely tired suddenly and I don't want to sleep, but you know when you try and lay on your side and not sleep, you know what happens? Yeah, you end up sleeping. Now, that was exactly what happened to me. I managed to wake myself up a couple of times, but I kind of drift off again. It's almost like I've got an alarm clock in my head, but I permanently had it on snooze and I wake up again. When I woke up, I felt like I'd slept for ages and almost like I'd had the best night's sleep of my life, but everything felt different now. I get up and look at the sky, and it's kind of got like an orange hue to it, and I continue on the trail and try and find where my friend is. For some reason when I wake up, I suddenly feel much more peaceful. I wasn't concerned about finding my friend, and I presumed that he just left me there to sleep and went back to the tent, so I decided to go on myself. I drank quite a lot of water again, and I was actually running out in my first tank, which is surprising. Again, no urge to urinate, which I think is really weird, but I keep going. Now, as I'm walking, I can hear a strange humming. It was almost like a kind of energy is the best way I can describe it. I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I knew I should keep going, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this is what John was telling me about. And I thought in the back of my head, maybe this is him up here making those sounds. I decided to continue, and I make it a bit further now. The going's actually quite tough here, and the terrain's quite rocky now. I'm not too happy about this because I keep on whacking my shins when I'm trying to go up this thing. And also I keep getting little branches and things that are cutting up my ankles. But for some reason I'm not too bothered by this, and that's weird too, because usually I'm really worried. As I get higher and higher up, I realise something weird now. I seem to be talking to myself in my head kind of far too much. It's quite weird. It goes from very positive to suddenly very negative, and it keeps on switching between the two. And that's when I realise that something's different about the sky. The colours seem off, and the sky just seems far too bright. Now, I think this is really bizarre, but nothing too much to worry about. Again, I wasn't really thinking straight at this time. Now, I end up just walking and walking, and I don't necessarily have a destination in mind. I don't know how far I was gone for, but I see my buddy up ahead of me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, John, and he keeps on walking and rounds a corner. I think, God, you're such an idiot. My foot was starting to hurt now, and I can't be bothered to walk quicker, but I practically force myself to power up towards him. I eventually make it there, and I realise something strange. He's just vanished. I try and figure out where that he's actually gone to, and I walk up the hill and look over it, and there he is again. John! John, I scream out, but he doesn't listen. What's weird is that he just keeps on and on walking, but He seems to be far too far away from me. Even if he sprinted down this hill, he shouldn't have been able to get this far, and I suddenly realise that I can't see him any longer. I think this is odd, and I look around, and suddenly I've realised that there's a few more people around. There's quite a lot up on a ridge, and they're all waving at me, trying to get me to come over to them. I can see that they brought some kind of dirt bike with them, and I put my hand on it, but I decide to leave it because it's theirs. I think that this is a group that we've seen earlier, so I start to go further and further. And my god, do I have a bad migraine or something, because my eyes are going a bit funny. I'm kind of seeing the weird colours again, but my vision's definitely a bit off now. I try not to think too much of it, and I reach down and realise that there's all water over my hand. I quickly start slapping around trying to figure out where the source of it's from, and notice how cold my hand is, when I realise that suddenly my hand isn't wet and it's in my head. I'm not aware that something's off at this point, and I just thought it was lucky that there's no water here. I then open up my bag and start drinking, and I realise that the heavens have opened up now. There's rain falling all around me, and it feels quite nice to be out of the desert sun. Now, I eventually make it up to the hill where all the people are waving, and it seems like they're being very friendly to me, saying good things and encouraging me. I stop to get a bit of breath and rest my legs for a few moments, and I say, "Hey guys, wait for me, I won't be long." And that's when I realise that my vision's gone a bit weird. It almost feels like I'm going backwards now, but I'm not. I take a few deep breaths and I become very, very conscious of my breathing and the rain around me. This calms me a lot, and I think the deep breathing did me some good. And I'll continue on and make sure that I can see my new friends at the top of the hill. There seems to be less and less of them now, and I eventually make it all the way up there. Now when I get to the very top, suddenly something changes. It's almost like they've all just appeared around me suddenly, but as I look at them, their faces seem off, and I suddenly notice that there's something very inhuman about them. Now, their faces look much more scary, and suddenly they morph into some kind of dark figures which tower over me. I mean, it starts off with about my height until they're about 2 or 3 times taller, and suddenly they surround me. But for whatever reason, I don't feel afraid and I don't feel scared of anything. I kind of notice that they're around me, and because I can't see now, I kind of lose my balance and fall over for a second. When I fall over, I'm staring back up at the sky now. I don't feel any pain or anything, but I can see lightning bolts all around me, and the rain picks up a lot more. I wiped my eyes trying to figure out what was happening when I eventually managed to get myself up off the ground again. I'm looking around and the figures are gone. I think, my god, did I encounter them? Was that it? What did I get out of this? Did I learn anything? Did I see anything? Are they actually there? And I think that this can't necessarily be anything that I actually believe's there. And I decide that I should keep looking for John. It suddenly clicks again. Now, that's when I start to get a bit scared. I have a sudden feeling of panic, and the more that I panic, the worse I feel, and I start picking up the pace more and more. And I start to see these beings again. These are different from the ones that I've seen earlier, and they seem a lot more malicious and malevolent. The further I go, the closer they seem to come towards me. It gets to a point where I honestly feel like there's an army of them behind me, and I don't dare look around. I'm not sure how long this went on for with this weird feeling of being followed, but my god, it must have been a long time. And I can tell you that I did not feel good during 1 second of it. I was trying to loop my way back round to where the tent should be, but to be honest, I had no idea of where I was going. Now, as you can imagine, this is incredibly dangerous out in the desert, especially if you're on your own, but I wasn't thinking of that. I remember eventually I was able to stop and turn around, and they're gone again. I look up in the sky for UFOs and the stars seem to be too bright and there seems to be too many of them. I wipe my eyes and it's rain again. I realise something's definitely off now. I start trying to hit my head, not hard, just enough to make sure I'm awake, but yes I am. Now suddenly things seem to go straight back to normal. The raining stopped now, which I'm pretty happy about, and I continue now, but I'm no longer on the path. I'm going towards some kind of darker area now, where the sun seems to be far from me. I get here and I feel like I'm on a barren wasteland, and I call out for John. All I met with is echoes, and I'm convinced that he's back in the tent. I say, John, you better be in that tent and I better find you there. And I start trying to go downhill now, and that's when I fall. I don't know how it happened, but I can only imagine that my foot got snagged on a rock, and I actually fall quite a bit down, tumbling. I fall asleep again, and now I wake up and John is prodding me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, what are you doing? Confused as to who it is, and that's when I see it. One of the dark beings has found me, and there's a sea of stars behind him, and he takes me by my hand and lifts me up. Now, as he's lifting me up, I realise that I'm in some kind of different area again to where I thought I was. For some reason, this being seems a lot more friendly than the others, and seems to be guiding me away from wherever I was before. I look back and I can see the army of the others once again, and this thing just demands without saying anything that I look forward, and that's exactly what I do. Now, I keep going down pretty treacherous terrain, but this thing seems to be really helping me get through. Now, as weird as it sounds, I was pretty much having a full-on conversation with this thing in my head. It spoke in almost like a hushed tone, but kind of with more reverberation. It was like every time that it spoke, I would hear things and feel it through my body. I was asking where we were going and it said to safety, and I kept asking what's happening and it kept saying don't worry, don't worry. Now I'm not sure when it happened, but this being, whatever it is, left me, and it was up to me to continue the rest of the journey. I look around and it's much further away now, pointing, trying to usher me to go forwards, and I follow it. I'm now walking pretty close to some kind of crevasse or something. Almost like a very, very small Grand Canyon's probably the best way that I can describe it, but maybe not grand because of how small it is. Again, I'm going on a pretty sheer rock face, and how I don't fall at this point is beyond me. I know that my fall was definitely real though because of the blood on my white socks. Now, it doesn't take too much longer, and a miracle happens. I can see the tent, and it's where it should be, and I can see the silhouette of something or someone in it. Is it my friend? What is it? I think to myself. Now, I'm pretty much glued to the spot, and I realise that I've been asking myself this over and over again in my head for God knows how long, until eventually I decide that I've got to will myself forward, and it's almost like I've got to will one foot ahead of the other. I eventually make it there and open the tent, and John's there. I say, John, what are you doing? He says, hi, you're back. I was getting worried about you. I say, what do you mean? He said, I thought you said you were going to come back soon and we're going to take a leak. I say, I didn't say that. You were just going up the hill. And he looks at me very confused. I then tell him about the beings, and he tells me that he saw some too, but he wasn't sure what to think of it, because he was quite tired and thought it was a dream. He then tells me that he thinks what he saw was me, and called out, but I didn't reply, so he told me to meet me back at the tent, and he fell asleep. I decided not to tell him exactly what I'd seen, and I ended up crashing out. Now, I woke up again the next morning, and my god did I feel terrible. My body felt like absolute crud, and I decided the best thing to do is slam lots of water. I feel a lot better, and suddenly my heart starts pounding. Suddenly, all of my senses come flooding back to me in the fear. This terrible fear of realizing what had happened the night before comes back to me. I let out a loud gasp and grab my friend John, who is still sleeping. I shake him awake and it looks like he's just seen a ghost because of the way that I've awoken him. I then explain everything that happened to him and that's when it hits us. Something was definitely off last night. I explain my story and he then tells me his, and we weirdly both describe the beings as being almost exactly the same as each other, and we have this horrible feeling of dread like something's really off. My friend John now realizes that he definitely didn't understand what actually happened to me, and that it's weird because we have different stories of how we lost each other. We decide that we need to go back and make sure that we stay nice and hydrated because we're going to move quick, and we quickly pack up the things. Now, I can't describe to you the feeling of dread that I had when I packed up everything and I start heading back with John. I was absolutely convinced that it was paramount that we were about to be followed by those beings. Now, I have to tell you, in this moment, it was so real. What I'd seen and experienced is truly like nothing else that I've ever seen on Earth before. And I don't know, in the moment I was kind of in this trance, so I just guess I went along with it. I remembered every time that I'd see a bush or tree that was darker than the rest, I almost had a mini heart attack. But I kept going. I didn't have a choice. The weird thing is too that the landscape all looked different from the way we'd come in. Luckily though, John knew the way and eventually we make it back to the rocks which had been put there by others to mark the way. Now neither of us say anything. We're both very paranoid and constantly looking around, trying to see if there's anything there or any kind of explanation for what we'd just seen. We start talking a bit, and that's the more scared we get, the more we try and match up what had happened. Now, eventually we do make it back, and my god, getting back to being inside a vehicle was probably the best feeling in the world. I was actually so shaken up that I couldn't drive though, and I just had to lock the doors and just lay in the seat for a while, trying to think of what had happened. Had we been drugged? My buddy John then says that he thinks that we were probably drugged and that those guys probably spiked us with something that we ate or drank. He said it sounded like a weird drug that he had heard about before that can make you hallucinate, and apparently the plant for it and seeds are actually quite common in nature, and he thinks they probably got it from here and thought it'd be funny to do it and not tell us. I was convinced of the same thing because the whole thing just felt so weird. God, how could they be so evil to us? I mean, we literally could have died. We could have ended up like those hikers who went out into the wilderness and just disappeared. What really worried me is the fact that we got separated out here, completely out of our minds, both of us. Now, anything could have happened to me. I checked for bruises and I didn't have a headache or anything, but I could have easily hit my head and got brain bleeding or something. I don't know, it's just too easy to happen out here. But the thing that neither of us understand is, how do we get back? We both agree that we're probably miles away from each other at some point, because at the very least we should have heard each other screaming out, but we didn't hear a thing. And the rest of the drive back was a pretty weird one. This is when the both of us discovered that we had also seen the rain before, but the area around us didn't seem to be too wet. I mean, yeah, it is a desert, so it could have just evaporated, but I don't know. It just felt a little bit different somehow. And eventually we get back. Now we make it to John's mum's house, and John's mum says, "God, you guys must have seen it. Surely you guys seen it. Tell me you did. It was right where you guys were staying." We look at each other very concerned. Was this the first that the beings had been actually reported or what? And his mum then says, "Did you see the UFO? I saw it. So many of our neighbours saw it." I say, "What do you mean?" Getting a little bit angry. She says, "The UFO. So many of us saw it. Those weird flashing lights in the sky. It was almost like a big triangle with red glowing orbs under it. It went over to roughly where you guys were staying in the desert. Then a few more appeared, and it was there in the same place for about a good half an hour. My heart drops now. Apparently it was accompanied by a quick storm, and suddenly they just shot off, never to be seen again that night. Apparently hundreds of people had all seen the same thing, and the timeline pretty much matched up to when we got over there. Now, me and John looked at each other, and we went off into his room and sat down for a while. We made some tea, and just kind of stared at each other, not knowing what to say. Now, it's been quite a while since this experience, and I don't know, I could have very easily been drugged with my friend, but the fact that a lot of what we had seen matched up with each other, and the other fact that so many people had seen something in the sky that night exactly where we are, it just seems a little bit weird. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know. Before I'd eventually become a park ranger, I was a scout. I actually went on some summer trips to get some training in, and just try and get used to the great outdoors a bit more. I'd always thoroughly enjoyed these trips. I remember though that my view of this changed when I got older. Now let me explain. My father had also worked as a scout leader, so I didn't really feel uncomfortable being in those kind of environments. I pretty much had all of the work to do with my dad at home. He would really teach me the most. We would go on lots of trips together, out into the woods, so that way I could get accustomed and acclimatized to it. I'd actually known for a long time that I'd want to work as a park ranger when I got older, and my dad actually really helped and supported me with this. I found having a strong figure like that in my life definitely helped me. He could always give me guidance and the confidence whenever I needed it. He also seemed to be able to sense good things were happening when they were. I haven't really met anybody else similar. My dad actually says that he can sense paranormal and things like that, which he's also kind of evidenced before. He might be able to walk into a place which is old and say, "I don't like this room." And then later, we'd find out that the room was haunted supposedly and things like that. So I'd always really trusted my dad. And I remember, like I said, one specific event happening which I couldn't explain with my father. This is a digression from the main story, but I think it's quite interesting to share it. Now this happened when we went out together, and my dad wanted to show me how to do some hunting. We'd always bring some supplies with us, but he always emphasized the importance of making sure that you had more than enough and that you didn't leave anything out there. He said there's nothing worse than being hungry out here. Apparently you couldn't always hunt when you needed to, and also if you went into certain areas you couldn't just take what you wanted from the land. That was mind-blowing for me at the time because I just wasn't used to there being rules. I thought you could do whatever you wanted because in my young mind nobody owned this land, but of course I was wrong. I remember we set out, and my dad seemed to be a little bit confused. He kept on repeating again and again that no, this isn't where we should be. We should be somewhere different by now. This is before we had smartphones or GPS, so he was constantly looking down at a map. I tried to look and help, but I could make literally no sense of the thing whatsoever. But we were certainly lost. We'd only been out here for about an hour or two, which was especially strange. Now, eventually, we seem to be able to figure out roughly where we are, but the more that we go on, the more my dad tells me that no, we're just not where we should be. I've never really seen my father panic before, so I guess it was a little bit weird seeing him starting to. Then again, we'd only been out here for about half an hour or so before eventually we find our way back. What was weird is that it seemed very dark, almost like it was about to rain. We've been so focused on getting ourselves back out of here that we hadn't really noticed it until now. Really weird. That's when my dad looks at his clock and he's absolutely shocked. 12 hours have passed since we've been out there. It'd literally been about an hour according to me and my dad, or maybe an hour and a half. There was no way that 12 hours could have passed in that short amount of time. My dad kept checking on his watch to make sure it was working, hitting it a few times. We then get back into his car and yep, 12 hours times passed and it was truly nightfall, not just the weather changing. That was extremely weird. I still can't explain it to this day. It's almost like we stepped into another reality and time had kind of warped around us. I don't know how to explain it, but it was definitely weird. Now for my main story, like I said, I was pretty big into the Boy Scouts, and I remember one group that I'm never going to forget. I'd been sent away there one summer to spend about a month with them, and I said goodbye to my mum and dad and excitedly went forward. I was very excited to collect all of the badges and do all of the challenges because in my mind, it was accelerating my career. I remember the first couple of days went pretty well and nothing seemed to be too far out of the ordinary. However, strange things started occurring. Every so often they would go away from where I was and they would just do weird things. I mean, they would just act weird and say weird things that I didn't understand. In my young mind, I presumed that this is because they're talking in another language and it's one that I'm not used to. I was probably about 13 or 14 at the time, so I was definitely young, but again, I wasn't too fazed by this. So I thought not much of it. Now after a couple of weeks, I kept on getting this burning smell in my tent. I'd wake up in the night time, and sometimes I could have swore that I'd see movement. I just couldn't explain it. I'd wake up in the morning, and I'd ask the team if anybody had went anywhere, but they'd reassure me that no, nobody went anywhere and just going back to sleep was the best thing I could do, so I did. There was a few other kids there too, but they basically slept through everything, and I basically start to doubt whether it's in my head or not. I had some good intelligence at the time to realise something was off, but I kind of pushed this away from the forefront of my mind. So we go out one day again, and while walking through the woods, I do notice that there's other people coming in the opposite direction. I think we're out to do fishing or something like this that day, I couldn't remember, but they were dressed pretty weird. They were also carrying something that stunk. I went to wave at them and one of the others said, no, it's fine. I then realised that he knows these people, and again, it kind of reassured me, but I didn't really trust it for some reason. There was about 5 of them walking in a row, holding something carried on their shoulders which was tied in but covered in a bag, so I couldn't tell what it was. So they go off. So now, we get to the fishing spot, and again, nothing's too weird. We just get on with our things, and that's when I start speaking to some of the other kids there. They say apparently that they've heard some weird things in the night now. Finally, I'm not alone. I say, what did you hear? And they say that they've heard screaming and even seen blood and things like that around where we were camping, and strange markings. I don't know what to think of it, and I think maybe somebody got hurt out in the woods or something. But I was so confident being with this group of adults that I presumed that nothing could hurt me and that it's all in my head. So I decided not to tell the others about the weird things that I had been noticing too. I was actually a little bit annoyed that nobody said anything to me earlier. Like, why did everybody else seem to know of these other things but me? Strange, I think. Now we go on for almost the last week, and I'm then awoken in the night by something else strange. I hear a constant whacking sound. It's like somebody punching a tree with a metal glove. It's almost like not as strong as a hammer, but not much else, if that makes sense. It sounded like a thud, but it was just off. I then wake up in the night and I go to try and figure out what this is. I slowly peer out of my tent, and further up ahead, I can see something crazy happening. I can literally see some kind of animal laying there on the ground which has clearly passed away, blood absolutely everywhere, then people dancing around it. I can now make out the reason that I'm hearing the thudding sound. Somebody's beating a drum. I think it's crazy, but being so scared I just go back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I didn't want to go outside of my tent, but I really needed more water, so that forces me out. One of the leaders there asked why I'm late, and I start explaining what I heard, and he looks a little bit weird about it. He says, I don't know, can you describe them? And he looks at me weirdly, and he says, don't think too much about it. I now realise that something's really off here. So we go on for another few days, and eventually, my dad appears out of nowhere. Now, I don't know why he come, but he says that he needs to take me home because of some kind of family emergency. So, I head off home with my dad. It turned out somebody in our family got quite unwell very quickly, and we had to see them overnight, but luckily they were fine. Now everything's normal for the next couple of years, and that's when I asked my dad about the group much later. The more I explain it to him, the more concerned he looks, and I say, yeah, there was just something odd about the group. He then asked me to detail what had happened, and he looks at me very weirdly, and he says, son, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I then ask him to explain more, and he says that I think I've made a horrible mistake. He then does some researching and looking round, and it turned out that there was an occult operating out in the woods where I went, and there were some people which were pretending to be Boy Scout leaders that were actually trying to recruit young children into their cult. Now, I absolutely blew my mind when I heard this. I can never be 100% sure that that is what happened to me, but from what I saw and heard, it seems very likely that that was the case. My dad coming over there that time probably saved me from God knows what happening to me. I'm someone who always did night security, and I never really enjoyed it, so I eventually changed my careers and become a forest ranger. Now this is a job that I absolutely loved. I remember on one shift, I got a report that I had to go and check out an area because people were littering, and I got there and of course there was nothing. The wind and stuff would make things blow away everywhere, and it could be really difficult to track down even litter, let alone the litter bugs. Now that's when I noticed something strange. There's a deer up ahead. I say deer, but then I realised that it was attached to a person. I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost like a deer standing up with the front part of a human. Now I was absolutely awestruck by this. I've never seen anything like it. It was accompanied with a strange clicking sound and the sounds of somebody calling out for help. Now, I was very brave in this moment and I completely bolted out of there. Much of my retreat is a complete blur, but I eventually made it back to the station and I explained what had happened. I was pretty concerned, and some of the other rangers then called me in and decided to tell me what this is. Apparently, they're called skinwalkers. Now, at the time I wasn't sure what it was, but apparently they'll imitate the sounds of your loved ones or other hikers, try and lure you out and do God knows what, and they told me just to ignore them. Imagine trying to do that. I vowed to myself that I would never go up to one if I'd actually seen it again, and weirdly, I'd never seen one again since. I felt a lot better knowing that whatever this thing is hadn't followed me anywhere, but God, it still haunts me to this day. Just seeing that thing was enough to fuel most of my nightmares, and I do have days where I wake up in cold sweats thinking of it.